Hello, folks. I'm working on a pretty big video that originally I really wanted to get out this weekend, but that just isn't materializing. The amount of reading and script polish has just been a huge time investment. Hopefully it is coming this week or at the latest this weekend, but I really did want to get a video out now, so I'm doing something a bit more freeform here, a bit more relaxed. I'm kind of going to do it in the tonal vein of my tier list video. Basically, this is a filler episode where I get to talk about more personal takes and don't have to climb out of a pile of books like a homeless guy that's been squatting in a dark corner at the local library. Today, I just figured I'd talk about my least and most favorite parts of the four martial arts that I've had the most experience with. I've encountered and dabbled in probably half a dozen more than I'm going to ramble about here, but not really enough to have super developed opinions on them. Instead, I'm going to focus on BJJ, Judo, Karate, and Aikido, easily the four I've spent the most time on. Alright, let's hop in. So let me start with BJJ. I want to point out that I do have the least experience with this art, and my time with it has been very start, stop, start, stop, start, stop over the years. I really don't think I'm anything special at any of the arts I practice, but I'm really pretty mediocre at this one especially. Probably for reasons that I'm about to get into in a second. I definitely think I could be better if I took it more seriously, but that has historically been like swimming upstream for me. What I will say is that my least favorite thing about BJJ probably isn't exactly what you're thinking, but let's keep it positive first. What is my favorite thing? Probably the general willingness to try new stuff in the art, honestly. I think martial arts are at their best when they give you a foundational primer and then more or less cut you loose to experiment. This doesn't mean senior practitioners and instructors stop giving you feedback or anything, but it is generally acceptable to follow your own leads in BJJ. In the same vein, I think no-gi is a lot of fun, believe it or not, despite my usual gi bias. I really don't think one is better than the other, for the record. I see both of them as fairly contrived analogs for quote-unquote the real thing, but they definitely both have their own character. No-gi is much more fluid in the sense that if you find yourself in a losing position, your odds of coming back from it are much higher. Whereas if you start to lose in the gi, I feel like your disadvantage can snowball pretty quickly if you don't know what you're doing, and this is down to just how much more permanent grips are. I genuinely believe that if you took a judo rule set, made it no-gi, and allowed leg locks and leg takedowns, you'd probably have struck an incredible balance between practitioner fun and audience enjoyment. I know every time I say something like this, someone will be like, "That's just catch wrestling," or "X promotion already tried that." And trust me, I am acutely aware, but BJJ has a cultural clout that those things just don't. I am interested in catch wrestling as much as the next guy, but the harsh reality is that people pay way more attention to anything BJJ than they do catch, or some of these defunct promotions. In some ways, I think BJJ kind of has to be the heir apparent to some of these ideas, because unfortunately, it's just what people take seriously. Do I think that is a shame and kind of silly? Absolutely I do, but this just goes to show that 90% of martial arts dominance in the cultural zeitgeist really boils down to a basic popularity contest. But I digress. What is my least favorite part of BJJ? Everything guard. Not just pulling guard, but like everything guard. And I know that's like half the martial art, but this is my deeply opinionated video, fight me. I want to say, though, that it isn't because I think the guard is necessarily unmartial or something. I've really grown into this philosophic stance of accepting that martial arts are all pretty contrived, and pretty much all of them will ask at least a couple things from people that aren't quote-unquote realistic. The key to enjoying a given art, I think, is if your mentality aligns with the primary goals of that art enough for you to ignore or tolerate the contrivances. So for me, the guard is like a feature in a video game that I accept that other people really like, but this isn't a game I'd buy, at least not at full price. For a bit of context, I'm still in between dojos in Japan. I have a direction I want to pursue, future content coming soon, but right now I'm training at primarily a no-gi BJJ gym. Keep in mind that this is actually a really good gym. Like, I have no complaints. Probably the best BJJ place that I've been in terms of culture and professionalism. Everyone is great, it's very welcoming, and the instruction is very high quality. So this is not an indictment of where I'm training at all. What my little pit stop there has reminded me of, though, is that the second we start discussing guard passing or guard retention, I immediately begin to dissociate from my body. The instructor's voice starts to sound like Charlie Brown's teacher, while my brain wanders off to think about a grocery list or something. As much as I recognize the importance of guard and knowing how to deal with it, I really do feel like it is the singular most boring thing in all of martial arts. I know the classic BJJ defense to this is, you must suck at guard then, or whatever, but keep in mind that I do have a passing game, and I do have a bottom game. I'm not spectacular at them, but relative to my level, I do fine. The martial arts internet, BJJ and other arts more generally, has a very weird habit of the whole, he doesn't like the thing that I like, then he must suck at it type comebacks. Trust me, I'm going to take a dump on martial arts in a second here that I'm way more confident in. Just because I'm good or not good at something doesn't necessarily mean the criticism is invalid. But why don't I like guard? Well, remember how I said you have to be able to accept certain contrivances in a given martial art to enjoy it? Yeah, that. My issue is that every time I'm passing guard, there is this omnipresent itch in the back of my brain that is just like, kick him in the calf, get into half guard and then ground and pound, and so on and so forth. Now, keep in mind, I'm not saying these tactics negate the need for a ground game. They do not. I see a lot of novice martial arts takes online that are like, lol, I just stomp on him. And in practice, that really isn't a thing if the guard player knows anything about what they're doing. But guard passing is a whole lot easier when you can strike the guy. And coming from a striking background, it really is difficult for me to banish those impulses completely because the pure grappling guard pass just isn't how I deal with the problem normally. Likewise, I really hate bottom. Every martial art ever will hype up this notion that techniques will overcome size and strength. In a loose sense, this is sort of true, but in practice, you need to be pretty vastly more skilled than a person to actually materialize that philosophy. I'm 5'6" and 145 pounds, dude. There is no timeline where I'm on the ground and should be thinking, yeah, this is fine. I think it is super important for people like me to know what to do down there, how to escape, and how to stand back up. I really think those of us afflicted with pipsqueakism shouldn't ever fool ourselves into comfort on the bottom, though. Just in general, allowing someone heavier than you to also leverage gravity is typically not a great formula for winning unless you are significantly more skilled than the other guy. As an aside, I also have to say that there is a slice of the BJJ culture that kind of annoys me with the whole guard and guard passing thing. A certain breed can watch this stuff and be like, oh, it's so technical, bro. Even though the match has been 42 minutes long so far and just been a constant cycle of guard passing and then a person regaining guard with zero real progress. Like, again, I can acknowledge that this is an important skill and some people really enjoy it. I just immediately start to take a nap when I realize a match is going to be a war of attrition rather than one where somebody actually tries to just assassinate the other guy. All right, that out of the way, let's move on to Judo. My favorite part about Judo is everything takedowns. Takedowns are probably my favorite part of martial arts, period, in fact. I love throwing, and yes, I also love being thrown. I know that sounds like masochism, but I've personally never been hurt by a takedown. Good breakfalls go really far in enjoying grappling, I think. I don't really have much to add here. I just think there's a very special kind of dopamine hit when you put someone on their back and they have that wide-eyed look on their face while you're standing over them. Likewise, that split second of, oh shit, as both your feet come off the mat and you're flying through the air, just perfect, honestly. It's martial arts in a nutshell for me. My least favorite thing in judo is probably the bureaucracy and all the organizational politics and everything that comes with it. It likely will not surprise anyone on my channel, but I'm definitely in the leg ban is stupid camp. Generally, I think judo has sort of sold its soul to the Olympics. I'm not someone who necessarily believes that a return to tradition is always the answer, but I look at early judo history and it reminds me so much of how BJJ kind of is now, in the sense that there was so much more creative freedom. Now, between the Kodokan and the IJF and the Olympic Committee, there is this extreme calcification of what judo is. At best, I think it makes the art stagnant, and at worst, it even outright subtracts from it. This is why a lot of judo exploration is done in BJJ gyms these days, aside from the obvious financial advantages of doing so. Unfortunately, judo has just been almost like corporatized in a sense, that it is now frozen in this state that exists more for audiences than for practitioners, or just for the health of the art more generally. There absolutely is some utility in that. Martial arts are just a glorified popularity contest in the market space, as I said earlier, but I think judo has swung too far in that direction. Yes, the training is still high level. Yes, you'll likely find no better art to learn Uchimata and some other signature techniques in, but I find that I'm constantly falling in and out of love with judo because of the stupid and tone-deaf internal politics. Moving on to karate. My favorite part of karate, by the way, my pronunciation goes back and forth on this. I have the very American, it's karate, and then when I'm around Japanese people for a long time, sometimes I revert back to the karate. I think they're both valid in modern discourse. Anyway, my favorite part of karate is probably the footwork. My bias is showing here because aside from breakfalling, I'd argue my footwork is probably the skill I'm best at in martial arts generally. I'm not a really huge fan of the whole point sparring scene, but I think there are components of it that have stood the test of time and are underrated. I look at people like Wonderboy Thompson, or to a lesser degree, although he has karate-esque mannerisms, Jeff Chan over on MMA Shredded, and see so much karate in them. I'm very comfortable with that hands-down, dashing in and out style. I learned early on that as a smaller guy, I can't really stand and rumble with people larger than me. To use another video game comparison, it's sort of like playing with less hit points than everyone else. This has led me to a style where I leg kick and dance around people before setting up more decisive, precise hits that have a higher chance of ending the encounter. At the center of all that is being really hard to hit. Now, I don't think I've perfected this by any stretch of the imagination. I have decent head movement for a karate guy, for example, but I've long considered picking up boxing for really just learning good head movement. And there are other things I'd definitely like to add to my toolkit, but overall, the whole high mobility range play of karate is just a lot of fun to me. Although I will say a lesser talked about weakness to this style is definitely reach. I think it works very well against big, stocky guys, but the second you run across a tall, lanky dude who has really good body control, you're probably going to run into problems and are going to have to shift strategies. My least favorite thing about karate is kata, specifically how modern kata are implemented. I know probably 40-ish solo kata at this point. The bunkai are always changing. There are constant, minor, arbitrary changes to kata themselves. Bunkai practice is always cooperative, and you're expected to learn like 4 new ones every rank while keeping up to date with all the old ones. And by 4 new ones, I don't mean just like paired bunkai. I mean like whole full-scale kata. Not to mention there is no real progression or link between most of these forms. I really think kata, when managed properly, can be good. I think if your system has like 6 and then you standardize the bunkai heavily, and those progress into positional sparring, which then progress into true full free sparring, then that makes a whole lot of sense. They're on kind of a pipeline that leads you to fighting. But the way I see kata in most modern systems nowadays are basically as busy work. They have some utility in getting first-time athletes some coordination, but outside of that, they are basically disconnected from the rest of the system. If you want proof of this, you can go watch something like Uechi Ryu and then see how they spar. Just try to find the connection there, because there really isn't one. At worst, it feels like the arbitrary changes and stuff are an excuse to get people to come to seminars so they can learn that year's version of what is supposedly correct. Kata have gotten this way for a whole bunch of reasons too. Organizations or new style heads making up their own kata, or haphazardly adding kata from other systems without any clear link or logical reason to add it to the base system, adding them because they are just easy to teach to a room of 50 students, or adding them because a certain kata is scoring well in competition. It's all just really goofy and eclectic. Again, I do think kata can be an integral part of training, and I think historically they were, and they all did translate eventually into being better at sparring. I would direct you towards the Karate Breakdowns channel and the Practical Bunkai YouTube channel to see pretty decent examples of how this can be done now. But the reality is that most places aren't doing this. Instead, kata are just glorified showpieces that you'll learn 2 or 3 dozen of, but never really understand or master any of. All the while, the time you're investing into these deeply disconnected forms could have been spent on skills that actually have been much better maintained and have a link to sparring efficacy. All right, finally, Aikido. My favorite part of Aikido, and bear with me on this, is that the techniques, quote unquote, don't work. I know that some of you might be thinking, what the hell, but just hear me out. I think we are living in a period of time where people are deeply conditioned for instant gratification and will craft whole worldviews based on a couple of headlines and YouTube videos. One of the results of this in the martial arts space is this increasing expectation that martial arts are purely a product to be consumed. People want the best stuff and all the answers as soon as humanly possible, and this point of view is justified because, well, you're paying for it, right? To a degree, I do get this. I definitely think paying customers deserve to see progress, but I don't think it means they should have the power to dictate what progress means. The reason you're paying an expert is because you don't know things. Yet many martial arts consumers come in with this preconceived notion of what quote-unquote being good is, yet they don't actually know what that even means yet. To me, part of being a good martial artist is the ability to go off script, and implicit in that skill is martial creativity. What I like about Aikido techniques is that they are very much a problem to be solved when taught well, I think. Yeah, at the basic level, I don't believe you should be messing with this kind of training, but once you're like intermediate, upper intermediate, I think positional sparring is a good idea. Once you know the basics, it's a great idea to try and figure out for yourself how to get these techniques to work in live practice. The kicker here is that you probably won't get many of them to work. To a lot of people, they look at this as evidence that Aikido sucks, right? Personally, though, I see this as cultivating a skill that most martial arts struggle to develop in students, and that skill is creative problem solving. Because martial arts are now so consumer-driven, students want to know step by step exactly the supposedly optimal way to get the supposedly most optimal techniques to work. The problems with that are that no plan survives first contact, and it also makes people pretty dang predictable. The benefit of Aikido techniques, then, are that they are so niche that it requires students to really dig deep to find scenarios where they are applicable. They really have to figure out how to set these things up. For me, for example, this is what led to me studying wrestling, to experiment with different judo grips and so much more. It really began my deeper research into martial arts. Although there are Aikido techniques I feel that I can rely upon these days, see my Aikido tier list video for that. For the most part, I conceptualize Aikido as an art that is going to make you better at your other arts. I've had people tell me that I have a very weird, eclectic style, but really this all comes back to Aikido. I think because I've conceptualized my style as a big puzzle, and it's all about finding the correct pieces wherever those may come from. Much of my martial arts journey has been defined by this, and it's probably why I don't really identify with any one style too deeply. I just have particular techniques and strategic goals, and I'm willing to use whatever I need to make those aims consistent and reliable. Aikido, in many ways, is the art that taught me how to do this, how to build a personal style as a byproduct of chasing these really difficult techniques. I get that isn't for everyone, and I get most people want their training to be this 2 to 3 time a week, highly optimized, low thought, low stress kind of deal, but this is just what has worked for me, and it's my video, so you're going to have to deal with it. While I don't think most of the techniques I use are Aikido these days, I think the basic infrastructure and the way I build my style is very Aikido, and in that sense, it is near the heart of my martial arts journey. As for my least favorite thing about the art, it is hands down when people get too caught up in the theory and philosophy and all that. Don't get me wrong, all that stuff can be interesting. I actually think there is a deficit of philosophy in martial arts these days. That being said, my experience with these types of people is that they really just make shit up. Like, it's clear many of these folks have never read about Aikido history except maybe the mainline narratives. I'm just going to give one example here, but the founder, Ueshiba, is often held up as this peace-loving, wise sage warrior. While I would not detract from his martial contributions, the man, by today's standards at least, was not a good guy. Ueshiba was never a pacifist, his Aikido never really changed all that much, and he was pro-right-wing extremist, pro-imperialism, and pro-pan-Asianist. While Ueshiba himself was never directly involved in war crimes, keep in mind that these are the ideological positions that had the output of things like babies on pikes in Nanjing. These are not good things and are historically seen as extremely destructive, yet they are consistently swept under the rug when it comes to discussions about the man. His vision for Aikido was essentially as a religion in motion that would bind the Japanese Empire, colonized peoples included, under the emperor. He hid political assassins, had tons of associations with war criminals and just normal criminals, and allowed political coups to be planned in his home. Now, don't get me wrong, in the 1930s and early 40s Japan, pretty much everyone was some flavor of military extremist, and as a historian, I think projecting modern morality backwards is academically stupid. It's kind of malpractice. That said, Ueshiba never ceased his relations or sympathies post-war, nor did he have some peace-based revelation post-World War II or after his own experiences in the Russo-Japanese War, as is often peddled. Like 99% of modern Aikido philosophy has way more to do with an American New Age religion that was the brainchild of some absolutely zooted university students at Woodstock 69 than real source-based history. I really think most of the philosophical base of Aikido has been hijacked, and even if it weren't, I don't think philosophies derived from Japanese notions of ethnic superiority in the 1930s have any place on the mat space today. The stuff that pertains clearly to the martial arts side of things is fine, assuming people have actually read and studied about it. But Ueshiba's actual philosophy is pretty gross, and the New Agey, tree-hugging, ambiguously spiritual peace stuff that has replaced it doesn't really have anything to do with Aikido. I think martial arts in general need to have a better grip on their history, especially now when it's so much more accessible. But Aikido, at least in America, feels more like a vessel for the most West Coast of West Coasters to haphazardly apply their unrealistic utopian ideals to. It's super weird and does nothing for the martial art, either in practical training or in the court of public opinion. All right, that is all for me from now. Hopefully you've enjoyed this little hiatus. Big video soon. Be on the lookout. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the little filler episode. Catch you all real soon. Peace.